There is one sentence in one scene from one film, Patton, that sums up the least remembered of the 12 gods. Ares, the Greek god of war. The general walks the field after a battle, the earth burned and tanks set on fire, surrounded by corpses of men. He takes up a dying officer, kisses him, surveys the mayhem, and says, "I love it. God help me, I do love it so. I love it more than my life." Hemingway famously said that writers who had never seen war are always and secretly jealous of those who had, and try to make war seem unimportant or abnormal or some kind of disease as a subject. Well, in reality, it was something quite irreplaceable they had missed. And apart from his equally famous bravado, it would be one of our biggest fallacies to believe that although ever present in human history, war is somehow abnormal. How can we even justify this, knowing all too well that history has shown war to be not the exception, but the rule, the norm, if you will, of human affairs? Even during peacetime, we're constantly talking of trade wars, gender wars, cultural wars, and yet to declare that war is natural makes most of us cringe. But maybe there is a way to understand war as natural without glorifying its nature, the spiritual deposit of human experience that we call mythology. Through this spiritual deposit, the Greeks have given us an image of war in the face of Ares that shows a realistic understanding of its horrors. For them, Ares was the androphonos, or man-killer, a war god that, unlike those in other pagan religions, in Greece, he remained strangely marginal, with only a single temple surviving in Athens, probably a Roman reconstruction at that. His cults were rare, and details about them are nowhere to be found. And yet, Ares was part of the 12 gods who ruled from Mount Olympus, and his footprints have remained visible to this day. A planet of our solar system is baptized after his Roman name, Mars, along with a day of the week, Mardi or Martes in French and Spanish respectively. The religious scholar Walter Friedrich Otto coined the phrase true God to describe a God that is true because he captures an aspect of life that is also true. If Ares then still occupies a place in our calendar, there must be an aspect of life that is warlike. And to understand it, we must do what modern rationalists avoid, to move our imagination into the heart of war without any prior conception of what we'll find there. Starting from Homer's Iliad, a war epic if there ever was one, a new reader might think that Ares would naturally occupy the center stage. But this is simply not so. The god is featured, of course, but his influence on events is minimal, with almost every battle he engages in resulting in his defeat. In a scene from the Fifth Rhapsody, Ares is wounded even by Diomedes, a mere mortal, and when he returns to the heavens crying in pain, complaining to Zeus about the injustice of his misfortune, the father of the gods sends him away and says, "Most hateful you are to me of all the gods, because you love only strife and war and fighting." That is the surprising image painted for Ares in the Iliad. In fact, what is noble in war was transferred to another god entirely, Athena. And when she and Ares engage in conflict, the male war god always comes out the loser. How strange for the notorious patriarchs the Greeks are supposed to have been. Yet, how realistic for a people that engaged in war as a matter of course and knew its horrors firsthand. But while this portrayal of war is enough to satisfy our pacifist ideals, it's not complete. For there is another myth mentioned by Homer in his second epic, the Odyssey, There, Odysseus, once a brave warrior who fought against Troy, now reduced to a shipwreck, trying desperately to find his way home, hears the story of Ares and his love affair. Because it seems that beautiful girls don't just go for bad boys here on earth, but up there in heaven. For it was Aphrodite, the most desirous of the 12 immortals, goddess of sexual desire, goddess of Eros, who fell passionately in love with a barbarian war god. In yet another modern twist, Aphrodite was married to an engineer, Hephaestus, the ironsmith of the gods, ugly and lame from one leg, but an excellent provider, as he would forge every kind of jewelry that his wife set her mind on. But still, she went after the bad boy Ares, and when Hephaestus, her husband, was away on a trip, she let the war god in her marriage bed to consummate her ultimate desire. But as their limbs wrapped around each other, beauty meeting violence in a passionate embrace, the two gods began to feel something strange. Their moves became harder and harder, as if they were constrained by invisible chains, until they could move no longer. And it was all a trap, as apart from his body, Hephaestus also had the brains of an engineer, and had suspected his wife's desires. Pretending his absence, the ironsmith of the gods had devised a trap made from an invisible veil that trapped the two lovers like lustful flies on the surface of a lake. And to complete his revenge, Hephaestus let out a cry and invited the rest of the 12 gods to witness Ares and Aphrodite naked. In a unique Greek twist, Apollo, the most noble of the gods, asks Hermes, the crafty trickster, whether he would be willing to change places with Ares on the bed. Hermes replies that even knowing the shame that would befall him, he would be more than happy to exchange places just to be in Aphrodite's embrace for a single moment. The gods break out in laughter. Even by way of images, these two gods could not be further from each other. Mars is fiery, savage, master of horses, dressed in bronze, armored and shielded. Aphrodite is watery and soft, receptive and seductive. Blood iron rams horses for the one, roses, pearls and doves for the other. Yet the poets insist that through their union, always behind the backs of the rational mind, Hephaestus, they will produce a child, Harmonia, harmony. Now, what could this image mean? Could love, portrayed by Aphrodite, actually be in love with war? Remember, the myth we just recounted was first told to Odysseus, who for 10 long years had been fighting a war that started by love and through Helen's abduction by the Prince of Troy, Paris. That is ancient psychoanalysis for you, analyzing not the subject, but the phenomenon itself, which in this case appears to be the deadly entanglement of war and love. But thousands of years later, and our pacifist culture cannot even begin to imagine how the two could even be related. The General Patton, who admitted in our introduction, "I love it more than my life," was not alone in his admission, as numerous accounts by soldiers who saw action firsthand constantly describe war as not just something horrible, but something lovable as well. A member of his staff in Sicily wrote to his wife that the most beautiful sight that I ever beheld was a flaming enemy bomb that splattered itself across the side of a mountain. On the other side of Europe, and as London was bombed by the Germans, a first-hand witness wrote, "I shall never forget above all things the monstrous loveliness of that one single view of London, stabbed with great fires shaken by explosion, and in yourself the excitement and anticipation and wonder that this could be all happening at all." And as much as we like to pretend that we are different, at the end of the myth just recounted, the gods appeared one by one to witness Aphrodite and Ares' love and war and embrace. And if the gods are there, then we are there. And to understand the connection between beauty and violence, love and terror, we must understand the myth. Perhaps war then, just like love, is to be apprehended on first sight at the moment when it burns the hottest. And it's only by daring to move our imagination into this fire that we might have a chance of avoiding, if not war entirely, then its worst accretions.